Hi, and welcome to Corner of Fifth Street Talk, where we unpack marketing strategies and explore industry insights and consumer trends in retail, fashion, beauty, technology, luxury, and more. I'm Arthur Zaczkiewicz. I'm the content director of Corner of Fifth, and I'm joined by my co-host in our pregame show, Cass Spencer, who's the creative director. Cass, what's going on?
Hi. Pretty good. Been a good week so far. Happy Friday.
So what do you got? What have you been reading? What's on your clipboard?
On my clipboard this week, I just thought let's rattle through a few of the headlines from this week in relation to our subject matter, which is always like, the economy, retail, fashion, beauty, etc. So the headlines this week, we've got what actually the exciting news was this morning, the CPI was finally released.
Oh, yeah.
So after the government shut down, or they'd kind of, obviously that agency wasn't funded, so they couldn't actually release those figures. So it inched up less than expected, 0.3%. So we're still bubbling around the 3% year on year. So it's nothing too dramatic, but it's still a little sticky, still a little too high for what the Fed will want. There's still pressure for tariffs there. A lot of businesses, I guess, have absorbed to the tariffs. And by doing that, they've done the pre-tariff. There was that massive sort of surge in buying a lot of their inventories. Right. That helped to narrow the margins a bit. And there was a quote from Ernest Young this morning, which also said, we're anticipating a cumulative shock from the tariffs totaling 0.8% by early 2026. So they're basically saying that all these companies that have bought all this pre-tariff inventory and have been eating some of the cost, they're basically going to say by the new year that's all going to run out.
Wow!
So that's going to be an impact there. We've also got the early sales from Apple's iPhone 17, the pre-sale stuff, and it's done very well. It's been outperforming the 16, both in China and the US, which is very positive. However, the iPhone Air, aka the skinny phone, as it's been called, is reportedly selling very poorly. Now, iPhones are usually a good barometer for the retail market and the economy going forward. So there's a kind of mixed messages there, but yes, one thing's doing quite well, but the new product's not so popular. So we'll see. I'm sure you saw the Kering sold L'Oreal all its beauty business for a staggering 4.7 billion.
Billion, that's with a B.
With a B, big fat B. I mean, these numbers just seem ridiculous. You try and think about what you could do with 4.7 billion. It's insane. That gets them 50-year licensing on their big brands like Creed, Gucci, Balenciaga, and a multitude of others. For Kering, what this means is they can now focus on all their luxury fashion brands and really drill down into that. I don't know whether this is part of like worrying about any kind of recession coming up, that they wanted to focus on those areas. I don't know. But also L'Oreal's stock sank 6% this week because they said the results were underwhelming from the last 3 quarters. The company's also established a joint venture to go across the beauty and wellness sector. So there's obviously going to be some sort of projects coming up there. And finally, we also had announced today or yesterday, Target is announced it's slashing 1,800 corporate jobs.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. So the sales have been down for several seasons, which is quite surprising because Target's always been, particularly going into recessions, Target's always does very well. So that's quite a bit of a surprise. So we have this very mixed bag of Apple phones doing well, the consumer price index, inflation ticking slightly higher. We've got Target slashing jobs. It's really hard to get a foothold on what's actually any patterns here.
If you're listening, I have some ideas. If you're going to go into the wellness space, you should open up little spa retreat centers where, it could be in an urban area. It doesn't have to be, anywhere remote, but an urban spa where you can sell your products and then give people spa treatment. So there's my idea for you, free of charge. Let me know if you do it.
So next headline I have is the US consumer sentiment, which is basically saying it's settling in for a tepid holiday season. There was a McKinsey report that came out this week saying many shoppers are approaching the holidays with caution and practicality, adjusting their budgets and habits accordingly. It also noted that consumers are planning to scale back on discretionary purchases, something we talked about last week, a shift that has prompted some to begin their holiday shopping earlier than usual with a strong focus on essentials. This is the fun bit. The data is backing this up, basically. And what's interesting is that there's generational trends emerging. So 33% of Gen Z and 37% of millennials did their holiday shopping before October, compared to 26% of Gen X, that's you and me, and less than 20% of baby boomers. Also get this, 15% of millennials bought before August for the holiday season.
This has been going on for about 3 years now. A lot of that has to do with Amazon pushing, they I think it's called Christmas in July, whatever they call it. and they started pushing earlier and earlier, getting people in that mindset to buy earlier. Then, other Macy's joined in, and there's a whole bunch of retailers that are doing that because consumers are responding to that. And they get a good deal on something, and they're not tricked into thinking that the product's not going to be around or it's going to be a higher price, but they kind of are. So the framing of that is that if you don't get it now, you won't get it later. And consumers, I think, is just part of their habit, of buying. And it's also, I think, I don't know what the data is, that when back to school happens around August, a lot of retailers, are encouraging and trying to get them to convert to holiday shopping at that time. So it's ongoing. So I'm not surprised at all that that's what we're seeing.
Do you think there's a hangover from COVID days when there's the scarcity that they kind of play into that kind of fear?
Could be. I think some of that happened. Yeah, it could be. And it could be also the tariffs. I think people, the data showed in like April, there was an uptick of consumer stockpiling on certain goods because they're afraid that the price points would go higher as tariffs rolled out, which is true. I think we're seeing double-digit inflation on, different products and categories. So, yeah, consumers are definitely more frugal and mindful about how they're spending money this year. Thanks, Cass. In today's episode, we have Dr. Noa Gafni, who's a Columbia professor, and she's going to talk to me about businesses and business leaders and what they need to do and what they need to focus on to be successful in an environment that's very challenging at the moment. Really, there's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of disruption, and so we're going to talk about that. So stay tuned for that episode. Today, we welcome Noa Gafni, who's an expert on the future of business, quote, helping C-suite leaders see blind spots, simplify strategy, and lead with clarity. Noa serves as faculty at the Columbia and New York universities, and she's I guess when I read your LinkedIn, you're very impressive. I see you have a new newsletter, which we'll get to in a second. What caught my attention was the clarity, leading with clarity. As a business editor and reporter for decades now, it seems like a silver bullet to find that one way that you consistently lead with clarity. But I think we'll talk a little bit about that, what that actually means. First off, what is success and how do you measure it?
What a great question. And it looks so different than it used to, right, Arthur? If you think about earlier days in our careers, it was all about beating the competition. Right. So it was, you have a really clear industry, you're competing with the company that does the thing that's closest to yours. And that doesn't really work anymore because industries aren't clearly defined. And also the competition isn't necessarily your biggest threat. If you think about what's happening in the world these days, your business can be taken out overnight by something that has nothing to do with what your competitors are doing. So I think success is actually resilience, right? How can you create and strengthen your brand so much that it's resilient and that it can withstand a lot of these big things that are happening in the world so that it can continue to succeed in the next 5, 10, 50 years.
But there are things, I look at, as if I'm a business owner, I mean, there's certain things I can control and there's certain things I can't control, right? So like COVID, I have no control of that, right? Supply chain disruptions, I have no control of that. I could navigate and kind of try and be resilient while navigating these disruptions. But there's very few things really I have the power over. Like inflation is another thing, tariffs, right? So how do you do that without losing your mind? And kind of strive towards success as you deem it, right?
It's tricky. I think there's a lot around making sure that you're, I have these 5 forces that I know we'll talk about, but really in terms of succeeding in today's world, I talk about 3 mindset shifts. And the last one, to your point, Arthur, is all around how do we shift from, to sailing in the storm, right? So it's kind of, you can't be on defense all the time because the seas are not going to get less stormy. We see that it was COVID. Now we're having all of these trade war issues. We're having a lot of geopolitical tensions. The economy is uncertain. Technology is a big unknown, and society, environment. So there are all of these things happening around the world, and it's not going to get simpler. And so I think we really just have to become skilled sailors and make sure that we're able to navigate multiple things at the same time, and not necessarily with ease, but with confidence.
There was when I guess the generative AI came out. The industry's been using AI for predictive analytics and AI for decades. And then all of a sudden generative AI kind of made the mainstream, and businesses were scrambling. They were just making investments. They weren't, they didn't even know if they needed it. There was like no self-assessment, it seems. And a lot of them, I think they were later polled by MIT and other universities, and they found out that, that it was a flop for them. How do you do that when something new comes along? How do you stay competitive, but not like go in all out and it's going to like slog you down?
Well, I think a lot of people jump into things like AI because they think they need to without doing a real assessment of how it's actually going to impact their business. And so I talk to a lot of organizations that are like, yeah, we're piloting a Gen AI chatbot. We're dipping our toe in the water, basically. And that's not going to work because AI is going to totally upend their industry. You can't talk to a law firm and say, like, okay, well, it's really nice that we have this like lovely little tool here on the side when actually AI in the next 2 years is going to do everything an entry-level lawyer is doing right now, right? They're
That's
not thinking
scary.
through the impact on their business. It's scary, right? And I think that's why a lot of these companies don't want to have these conversations, is because it is scary and it's totally going to change the way they do their business. That if we don't think about it effectively, then we're just going to make a lot of these random investments and wonder why they're not effective.
And a lot of, this also goes back to the being resilient, right? So if you're a public company, you're under a lot of kind of different pressures, right? You got to answer to Wall Street. So how do you do that? How do you be resilient and forward thinking and look with clarity, but still answer to Wall Street investors?
You have to answer to Wall Street investors, and they're just as worried about these new five forces as any CEO is. They know that smart CEOs are savvy, that they need to navigate geopolitics, that they need to think really carefully about technology, that they can't get caught up in culture wars, and that they need to think about the environment and the economy in ways that are not political, but also, they need to navigate those forces as well. So Wall Street's money is on the ones that get this. And you can see every week there's a different announcement, love it or hate it, people doubling down on their commitments to the US in different industries, right? Like JP Morgan Chase this week made a big announcement. A few weeks ago, the semiconductor industry, Trump took a stake in Intel. So these are really strong signals, and Wall Street's listening. And I think smart CEOs are seeing opportunities as well as, things that they're really scared of, rightfully so, right? So I think it's a really, really tricky time.
What is, are there any like business segments or categories or sectors that you think are doing a better job at like navigating all these disruptions than other like company or sectors?
What a great question. I think retail consumer goods are always really interesting because they constantly need to innovate, and they also know that people vote with their feet, right? So that's why I'm so excited about this podcast, amongst others, is like people vote with their feet, and it's not going to be a choice that they make once every 5 years, right? They're in the grocery store every day, every other day. They're buying clothes every couple of weeks for a new special occasion or whatever's coming up next. And so I think they're the most dynamic industries because people really, you see the real world impact of tariffs. You see the real world impact of culture wars, right? We look at the American Eagle campaign over the summer, that was very clear in a matter of weeks what that impact was.
It hasn't been released yet. I hope I don't get in trouble, but Alex Partners, I did some work looking at their new consumer sentiment index. And it's interesting. You mentioned they vote with their feet. Traffic, according to the data that they have, is up. It's been up, right? But average basket size is down. So and people are going back to retail or back to physical stores. They're still shopping online, but they're visiting physical stores more. But they're not being engaged in the right way. So that's like a challenge, right? So you have them there and they want to buy. They're used to, they understand that tariffs are costing them money. They still want the best value for the best bang for their buck. And that's a tricky thing too. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you manage that as a retailer?
It's tricky. And I think it's also changing consumer preferences too. So the economy isn't just tariffs. It's also how do people like to spend their money? And we're seeing that experiences are up, but products are down. Even luxury goods, I think, are down 20 or 30%. The luxury experiences are up 90%, according to something that I read in The Economist. So we need to tap into that, right? That's another shift that especially brands need to think about, right? the people are going into the stores because they want to engage with a brand. They could be anywhere at that moment, right? But it's not converting for some reason. And so what can brands do to tap into that a little bit more effectively is an interesting question, because obviously that traditional, they come into a store to buy something and then leave. Something about that isn't quite the same anymore. They're coming into the store and maybe they're buying less than they would have. So what else are you going to do to engage them while they're there?
So yeah, this may sound odd, but my favorite retailer is Tractor Supply. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're great. There was an executive, and I think he brought some people over with him from Macy's who came on board, and it's just a great place to shop. Like when I go to Tractor Supply, I feel like I'm, engaging this brand, and they get that. In the spring they have little chicks that have just hatched. They're right on the floor there. They've tripled the size of their apparel offerings. They have all the brands I like. They have Carhartt and all that.
Yeah, they have Carhartt.
And it's and I'm like, wow, this is great. And then I go to other retailers which I can't name, and it's lackluster. It's not engaging. They don't get product assortments the right way. I can't find anything compelling, and there's nobody around. There's no sales help too. So it's a balance, right? Of having, I guess, the right product, knowing who the customer is, right?
And having the right experience. I mean, you remember the chicks in the spring at Tractor Supply, right? I have a house in upstate New York where there's a Tractor Supply nearby, and the clothes and the goods and everything is there. You're right. It's a really nice experience that caters to a different kind of customer than actually you would think Tractor Supply caters to, right? Like they've done it in a really clever way that all of a sudden new customers are coming in. And so I think there's a lot to learn from that. Legacy brands that are maybe a little bit more upscale, are kind of falling flat. And it's really interesting, isn't it?
Well, what state?
Hudson.
Oh, Hudson. So I'm in Highland, which is across the river from Poughkeepsie.
Across the river.
So yeah, so you understand the valley and its uniqueness and how wonderful a place it is. I think I want to ask you about, as you see, let's say I'm starting a business, right? And I'm like, I want to be successful, and I measure success by two things. One is making money and making sure I employ the right people. And two, I want to solve real problems for consumers. What are the challenges and opportunities that I face with that mindset?
It's harder to make money than we all think, right? I think that's the fundamentals of business and entrepreneurship, right? It's hard to make sustained returns. And I think that's why business today is so complicated, because it's not just about doing a good job and selling a good product. It's much more complex than that, right? We're competing in a global world. We're competing in a world where priorities are shifting very quickly, where margins are lower than ever. It's actually really hard to make money, I think, is the first piece. And then absolutely, you want to create products that serve people and give them that kind of feeling of something that they're looking for when they buy a product or a service. But it's really hard to sustain. I mean, look at all of the trends that come and go, right? And so I think it's really about, how do you zoom out? How do you make sure that you're not just looking at, well, I want to sell this niche today, and I see that there's a niche today, but it's like, what's that going to look like 5 years from now? What's consumer behavior going to be like 5 years from now in the age of AI? I saw the chief diplomacy officer at Meta a few weeks ago, and he was talking about their new glasses. And he was basically saying, we're all on our phone like this. We're looking down on our phone. So we want to create these glasses so that you're looking at all the information on your phone right in front of your eyes. And they call it personalized superintelligence. So they think this is great, but that's the future. I mean, whether or not we like it, that's kind of where this is going.
So what
does it need to sell?
Yeah, I mean, how does that? So I'm just thinking about the real world applications. Like, would I be walking down the street and I walk past, Walgreens, and an ad comes up or promotion comes up in my field of view? Is that how that works?
I think so. I think that's part of it. And another part of it is that it's looking at your eye movements and small hand gestures to help you actually make decisions, make purchasing decisions in the glasses, things like that. So that's wild, but that's the future. And so I think, we're focusing on like, how do we sell in social media experiences today? It's going to look completely different in 2 to 3 years. And so I think that's why it's actually, your question is really profound of, well, I want to make money and I want to sell something interesting, but that landscape is just changing so quickly. It's really hard to sustain.
You said, like, thinking about the future, I remember wellness emerging and evolving, about a decade ago. It was just being redefined. And today, the idea of wellness it becomes self-care. And for certain demographic cohorts like Gen Z, they equate wellness as a luxury experience, like taking care of pampering themselves. And the product shift has moved from, what we say is traditional categories into like skincare is like one of the biggest categories for Gen Z. Like, how do you predict the future? I guess you can, but
But it's not about predicting the future, right? It's like, how do you have all of these early detection signals in place so that you can capitalize on the future? I think those are some of the questions that I hear businesses asking, because there's so many unknowns in the future. But how do you have all of these early detection opportunities? And that's through technology, and that's through, figuring out societal shifts more effectively. That's on figuring out what some of these longer term trends are in environment and economy. Thinking through all of those things so that when something does hit the tipping point, you're already there.
Let's talk about your newsletter, the 5 Forces. Is that what it's called?
The new 5 Forces.
5 Forces.
Yeah.
Okay. What's it about? And how's it, as a business owner or a C-level executive, how's it going to help me inform my decision making?
So I have an MBA, and the first thing we learn in MBA is called the 5 Forces, and it's all about how businesses compete with each other. But actually, it's no longer relevant because businesses aren't necessarily competing within their industries anymore. If you think about some of the classic examples of what industries look like, Amazon started off as a bookstore. Nobody's really comparing it to Barnes and Noble anymore, right? So I think businesses that succeed are much bigger than their industry. And also with everything that's happening in the world, industry competition kind of isn't your biggest fish to fry as a CEO, right? And so, you're worried about getting caught in the culture wars. You're worried about tariffs. You're worried about all kinds of things that don't necessarily have to do with what your closest competitor is doing this quarter. And a great example of that is Coca-Cola. So if you think about what happened earlier this year, there was a fake video of ice coming into a Coca-Cola factory, and Coca-Cola supposedly called ice on its own workers. Now, Coca-Cola didn't actually have a factory where this fake video took place, but it resulted in a boycott, and that boycott was so big that they had to talk about it on their earnings call. Do you think Coca-Cola was more worried about the culture wars or Pepsi in that quarter, right? So that's what the newsletter is about. It's about these new 5 forces, which are technology, geopolitics, society, environment, and economy, because those are really the biggest threats to your business as a CEO. And staying on top of those is really what's going to get you to succeed in today's day and age.
My last question is, let's say I'm a C-suite executive, maybe the CEO, CMO. How do I create a culture of success throughout the C-suite? What's involved, and what do I need to consider and do?
What a great question. I think the first thing any CEO, CMO needs to do is to talk to across the C-suite about these 5 forces, these new 5 forces, because I bet that your head of government affairs, your chief sustainability officer, and your chief information officer are not having these conversations. It's very rare, right? Everybody's worried about digital transformation over here and the economy over there and the marketing strategy here. And nobody's really talking about the intersection across all 5. And I think CEOs and the C-suite really need to get smart about, all of these things intersect. So how can we make sure we're on top of it?
That's we're almost out of time. So we got a couple of minutes left. Any parting thoughts that you would kind of leave our audience with?
I think it's a really exciting time. I think we have to think about...
Are you optimistic about...
I'm optimistic. I don't think it's going to get easier, but I am optimistic because I think we can look at these shifting times as design constraints. And I think for creative people, it's actually a really compelling time to rethink, right? So it's not just about being a resilient organization. You actually have the opportunity to redesign what your entire business model looks like, what your customer journey looks like, right? I think you can actually break down some of these trends into just completely new ways of working. And I find that really compelling and really exciting.
But it also just requires what you were saying before. You have to make sure that everybody is aligned and rowing in the same direction in the C-suite. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. And we see that it's not working, right? You have, the retailers that you were talking about earlier that you won't name, they have like a tech experience that they want you to have while you're in store, and they have, a sustainability experience that they want you to understand, and they have a marketing experience, right? And it's not intersecting when you actually get to the store. And so think about how successful that is when it does work, right? You remember it, you want to purchase more, you want to stay in the store longer. And so you want to talk about the brand afterwards. So I think when we're all rowing in the same direction, it's not just about being a more resilient organization. You're actually really able to stand out.
Thank you so much for your time. This is a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation a lot. And we should have you back. We'll have you back, and we'll talk about maybe generational marketing or something like that. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Arthur.